So I'm Ghislaine Boddington, and I started working at Chisenhale in 1985 as the first project manager. It was called, the role was called project manager, and it was the first paid role in the Chisenhale collective, which was supported, I believe, by Greater London Assembly at the time, and maybe Greater London Arts. It was a variety of different funding had come together at that point after quite a long time of gathering energy and getting on the map in a way, and getting really solidly sorted out in terms of memorandums and articles and all those sides of things. So, and I'd come from doing BA Performing Arts at Middlesex University. So the BA Performing Arts course there, I finished in 83, but I'd done dance as my main subject and voice as my second one. So, and during that time at Middlesex, I realized I wasn't interested at all in the classical or more contemporary dance forms. I was very much more into looking around me and very interested in intercultural forms of dance, which I got the chance to do on that course, of course, and into the diversity of what was happening and much more into modern ways of thinking. So when I left Middlesex, I was already working with Dance Umbrella, and I continued to work with Dance Umbrella actually really right through to the early 2020s actually. So doing project management, learning curatorial practice, producing, etc. And I'd already started doing work with the Commonwealth Institute, which doesn't exist anymore, but which was where there was a lot of emphasis on African music village and African dance, and with Indian dance and visual arts as well. But really some very good input from two key figures, Robert Atkins and Nassim Khan, who were real movers and shakers in the intercultural world. So I started Chisenhale after doing quite a lot of work in those two particular jobs. And with Indian dance in particular, with Shobhana Jaya Singh and Pushkala Gopal, etc., and came into Chisenhale then as his first project manager.
And what that role as project manager, what did that entail? I mean, as the first sort of paid position, I suppose it was a bit of figuring out exactly what that might entail, and what your role might cover.
Yes, I mean, Chisenhale, the 3 years I was there, and I stayed linked into it, of course, beyond that, but there was always a lot of generosity of giving of skills. Yeah, so always throughout my time there, the different jobs that needed doing, different skills that were needed, were taken up by different collective members at different points of time. And so in a way, I was paid slightly to coordinate that. In a way, it was partly that, and to make sure at least that the work was on its way and getting done, etc. And then a lot of running the program. So actually, once the program went into place through the programming committees and different, application rounds where people were applying to do cha-cha-cha nights or various things, then it was my job to get that to happen. And then the classes started. So this became kind of, Chisenhale started to be open to the public, from 8:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night. And it was a running thing that just was gathering pace across the time that I was there. But I wasn't on my own in a paid position for very long. There was literally probably within 6 months to a year, there was 2 or 3 more people who were coming in different roles, more on operations side and admin side, etc. And I carried on much more working with the program itself. It was complex, and I think actually probably looking back on it, my first year there, the collective were working out what my job was or what the role of paid people was as much as I was. So it was confusing at times. And I think for the board as well, they were confused by how the shift over could happen. But there was some very solid, wise people as well who actually held it together, and I learned a lot from as well during that time.
And in terms of the programming and sort of organising or coordinating that, was it your role to be processing funding applications and applying for grants for the organisation?
Not entirely. That was always done with 2 or 3 others in the collective, because it would depend what we were going for. So if it was, say, for example, Susie Gilmore doing the cabaret nights, then she would attack that application and I would come in and back up on bits and pieces, and several other people would too. And then actually, as we got more staff in, you know, people who were paid as such, there was people with better skills than me at that, because I am actually more a producer curator and still am actually. So it was much more from my side, was coming with my dance knowledge, and realized I had quite a lot of intercultural knowledge, which I expanded into Chisenhale, and also very interested in community participation from my point of view. So I got really quite involved in working alongside Mary Prestige and Chris Cheek on the community dance side, and working alongside the new young work that we put out every month in these cha-cha-cha nights, where there'd be 3 or 4 pieces. And then dealing with residencies, like very early work of like the Chumaleys and DV8 and various people with those residencies and rehearsal periods, etc. as well. So I was working more directly with the artists and public than I was with management and grant making, which is still true.
What was it that drew you to Chisenhale?
It was very much my feeling that I didn't want to get caught up in an institutionalized situation. I grew up in quite an open background with a lot of artists around, visual artists, and with dance in my family life too. And if anything, I grew up in Pembrokeshire in a kind of slightly hippie scenario. So I was kind of very much looking for the group of people that I could hang out with and look to the future with and be expansive with, and who were wide open, I guess, and not trying to box things or put things into particular categories, because I always kick back against that. So that's that I want things to stay open. I want things to mix and match up and layer over the top of each other. And I needed to find a group that I could learn within, as a young, you know, just having come out of a performing arts degree, you know. So, and I think I went to Chisenhale a couple of times, 2 or 3 times before seeing this job and applying for it, for a couple of workshops and a few evening shows. And I really liked the atmosphere and felt, this feels more like home for me than other colleagues and friends who are going off to work at Sadler's Wells or The Place or South Bank, etc. I just couldn't quite see myself in that realm. So I was lucky, really, that the timing worked out as it did. But I think I was what we called, and I don't know if you've come across this at all, but there was a group of us that joined around that time who were in our mid-20s, and we ended up doing, I think it was a symposium of some type, where we got called the kind of 3rd generation intake for the New Dance Collective. And that included Matt, actually. He was in that grouping, the others, and Catherine Tucker, Matt and Catherine and I were very much the core 3 from that grouping that came in at that time, the younger grouping of us. So, and we hit the back end of what had been an incredible set of discussions, working out of memorandums and articles, the move obviously from the river to actually up to Bow and how that had happened, getting the building, moving into the building. We hit the end of that period, and we also hit the end of the debate about whether Chisenhale should be public or not. Was very big debate about, because there was definitely a certain point in time which I wasn't around for, but which I was very aware of as project manager, where there was a split in there was a big discussion about whether Chisenhale should be a white elephant, some of the collective would say, in the middle of Bow, just for use by dancers and choreographers for studio space to make our work to go on stage, which wasn't invalid at all, that way of looking at it, because there was so little studio space for the making of more experimental work, for sure. So there was one group of people that felt it should be kept for dancers and choreographers, and another group of people who absolutely felt it could not be a white elephant in the middle of this Bow area of residential scenario next to a school, you know, in the middle of loads of other community centres, etc., because Tower Hamlets was always very active on that side. So, and when I started, obviously the go public side had kind of not won, but had kind of shown their strength and come through with the reasoning for that to happen, which is why the fire escape money was applied for.
But it's really interesting because working, like being responsive to the community, and whether that's working directly with them on projects like Mary and Chris were, or whether that was just sort of thinking about the social and political context you were working in and responding in some way to your work, seems so central to what ended up happening, you know, in the programme at Chisenhale. So
yes, no, I think it absolutely is completely. And that's why even though I wasn't around for that, quite a long-term debate and process, I think, even from the moving from the X6 to the Bow building, that discussion was happening across several years. What's this new space going to be? Is it for dance professionals, or is it actually for a public engagement program and community as well? What is the public engagement? Is that beyond the dance sector, or is it more for emerging dancers, etc., and choreographers, which is what we did do a lot of, masses. And but we also then, as you know, with Chris and Mary, I believe it was the first community dance posts that were given out in the UK, so they were very much a testing ground for it. And Tower Hamlets was an incredibly political borough at that point, because there was all the Docklands, there was no Canary Wharf, there was nothing there except for the original, you know, schools and buildings in the different communities that were, you know, around the edge of the docks, all the different Irish, Chinese, all these different multiple intercultural communities, you know. So
yeah, it's a really interesting area for that reason as well, and completely different, as you say, to X6, which was obviously Dockland area as well, and going through a process of regeneration too, but the building itself really quite inaccessible compared to Chisenhale, which was on, like you said, on a residential street surrounded by people, also on the canal where people would be coming past. And you know, part of the whole new dance ethos was to be aware of be responsive to your environment, and so it only seemed natural that that would be part of what Chisenhale would become.
That's a very interesting comment, actually. I think you're really right, because with X6, with the happenings and the use of the rooftops and the, you know, particularly Rosemary Butcher with the architectural side and Siobhan Davies, etc., they were being responsive to that environment. You're right, but it was actually a deserted environment, and, you know, the slow walks across Tower Bridge and all that. And you're absolutely right, moving to Chisenhale suddenly did. It was right in the middle of a very residential area and opposite a school, and with pubs around it and the park behind it, and, you know, and this massive amount of community activism that was happening with the Docklands shifts. So we were involved in Docklands Poster Project, and there was also all of the strikes going on, and the big every night the marches and the barricades around the newspaper buildings and all that side. And there was a lot happening around George Green School. There was the AA lot, the kind of recycled materials makers stuff, which, you know, nowadays people all think this is all new. It's not at all new, those things. They were happening en masse then as well. So and the Bengali community particularly, that Bengali community scenario where we were at a point where the mothers and grandmothers didn't speak English at all, and the children did, and the dads and grandparents a little bit, the grandfathers, but there was one point when there was a whole setup of English lessons for basic English just for Bengali women to be able to start to actually have any kind of access outside of the council block home, you know. So it was tough. It was really quite tough at the time. So, and then we were working with the African and Afro-Caribbean community around slightly more towards Bow, flyover, that whole area with Atom, the African dance and music lot. And so that was another lot. Chinese side, the Irish side, I'm half Irish, so that was easy for me to link into. And it was, once it was agreed, which was before I started there, but once it was agreed the doors were going to open, and the fire escape money was coming and the toilets were going in, that actually, the multiplicity of possible influences, I don't know there would have been anywhere else in the country with more, actually. It was and the layers of different people and politics, and through the steps festivals. We did these amazing steps festivals. I think we did 2 or 3 of them, maybe 2 across, they probably were annual. And we'd have like 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with 5 or 6 different dance forms on each day. So, and they were coming from Docklands and community. So there'd be Irish dancers alongside the Katakali lot, alongside, say, African. And they'd all show on that Friday night, and then they'd improvise together with Chisenhale people, of course. And then the next day there'd be classes galore with, I think we had up to 15 different types of dance going on across those weekends from different cultural backgrounds. And I love those, absolutely love them.
The amount of stuff that happened each year was incredible. Just the organisation, that must have gone into sort of pulling that off. But also the number of people and the number of different dance practices or dance backgrounds that were being presented at Chisenhale is also amazing. It's so diverse. From sort of
the classes and Arabic dance classes and the African drumming stuff, and I did all the Arabic ones. I loved that. And I started. I mean, you put in suggestions, but I put in for the kids classes, and those went on for years. Marks and Spencer's sponsorship we got, and it was incredible. But that very much came. A lot of that came through the community dance work side, and through probably 3 or 4 others and me, and really wanting to go with that stuff. And the extensiveness of the program was why I just could not do more than 3 years, because I was exhausted. I loved every minute of it, but it was intense.
You mentioned that a lot of the sort of connections to the local area and different community groups came through the community worker posts that you had. Did you also find that people approached you and wanted, from the local community, and wanted to sort of host things there or hold classes, or was it more of you inviting people in?
Interesting question. I think it gradually started to happen. I mean, there was, of course, as always with these things, there was a few times when there was people saying, what the hell are you doing here without doing anything for us? There was a few of those. And there was also a lot of approaches from the dance sector beyond, Tower Hamlets, the new dance sector, people who weren't even clearly new dance yet, but were coming through London Contemporary or whatever, but wanting to do something different. So Emlyn was very involved in bringing quite a few of those people in, and Sue McLennan, because they were teaching elsewhere as well, etc. So but I think the 3 years I was in, it was very much rooted through the absolutely amazing energy of Chris and Mary and a few around that, and Phil, and there was other people that backed that up and brought in different people, like Susie, I think, made some really good strong links into Half Moon Theatre and into the other theatre sector around it in Tower Hamlets. And so people kind of did their outreach in their particular areas.
And I guess maybe through grants and specific commissions, like the Gathering Light project that happened, which was a sort of collaboration with Camera Works, photography and dance project.
Yes,
and
I was a lead on that one, actually. So that's still the area I work in, really. So but I was really proud of that project. It was I worked a lot on that project to make it work between Camera Work and Chisenhale, and to get the standard up to what I knew it could be for exhibition land, because I'd grown up in exhibition land. So to have a catalogue and to have a proper openings in both places, and etc. So but it was that mix of sound, light, movement that I was very interested in, and still working, really. So we had an international mailing list. I was really proud of it. We had something like 70 international addresses where we'd send those to, and we'd spend the money on that. We thought it was important. and it was, you know, obviously Judson Church in New York and the Berlin lot, and Helsinki, where Mary has her links, and Amsterdam, and some in Paris too. And quite a few people were moving through that circuit of the new dance contact improvisation circuit and teaching at each other's places. And they'd come into Chisenhale and do different things too. So Kirsty Simpson and Mark Tompkins and Steve Paxton, and, you know, amazing actually set of people, and Lisa Nelson, and I did some of those workshops actually, and that was the beginning for me of working with digital technologies, was doing when the New York lot brought the digital videos over, and we did a whole week of projection and filming of the dance side and projection onto screens, and that's where I started doing my telepresence work from. So it really influenced me. That particular workshop kicked in for me for the next 15 years work. So you know, your question of describing what Chisenhale was, it was this tension between, you know, more pure dance and interdisciplinary, but interdisciplinary it was transdisciplinary, and that was the joy of it. It was partly to do with being based, you know, alongside 40 artist studios, and partly to do with the makeup of the collective itself, because by no means was everybody coming from a dance background, because Phil wasn't, and Chris wasn't originally, and, you know, various key people who really put a lot of energy and time in were not going to be teaching a dance workshop. They were doing other stuff. So and I think that you've hit on that socio-political bit of Tower Hamlets itself, which is still, you know, Tower Hamlets, Hackney Newham are still kind of at the top of the levels of, you know, absolutely melange of everything, you know. So that was very definitely there. We were part of Tower Hamlets Arts Committee. I used to go along to that. Chris and I used to go, and I learned a lot at that too. It was also very I mean, the feminist side was there very strongly. The memorandums and articles was written specifically to say that could never be more men than women in the collective and in the group, which I loved and I felt very good about. And that was really very little gender issues there. Very, very little, because you just, you know, you couldn't go in the door. If you were going to be genderized or be sexist at all, then for sure, you know, people like Jackie was very, you know, senior, and Mary Malesko on the board was very strong lawyer about those kind of things. So I felt very protected in that way, and really didn't hit so much of the kind of sexism in work until much later in my career. And I think that the early dance tech stuff for me was really important. It was, you know, very basic, but using these digital videos set me off on really my next, what I'm still doing now, really. So that was very important, the debates on it. And as I mentioned, this international networking too. So I think those are very key, those things in what Chisenhale was. The socio-political, the internationalism, the feminism, the, you know, the community outreach side, the actual interculturalism, absolutely at the base of what was coming into us, at least, and shifting everybody's views, you know. And you know, I did that little list of them, and I thought, wow, this is quite incredible, actually, what it did actually manage to cover and stand up for and stand out for, you know. Plus collective methodologies, which as we all know, are very complex. But I've continued to run collectives. Social and Cancer was a collective, and Body Data Space now is a collective. And I kind of grew up in collectives, so I guess I've, you know, been in it, and I know it takes more time. Definitely, Chisenhale took a lot more time because there was big meetings and lots of discussions and lots of decisions to be made and things that hung over week after week to get finalized, you know. But also, what it did was enable a practice of cooperation and collaboration, really, which was only just coming clearly onto the table in the arts at that point. The concept of co-creating rather than authorship was very, very green shoots at Chisenhale. There was a real belief in that co-creation side, and yet it wasn't easily acknowledged in the arts funding system or in the arts at all, probably until early 2000s. So the breakdown of the authorship side, was very interesting in that sense too. So I was really lucky to be in all those debates and those early learning scenarios, and has influenced me a lot, in what I do.
One thing that I've wondered is, and you touched on it a bit because you were talking about this tension between, sort of being interdisciplinary and being, purely dance, and whether it's sort of purely dance for dancers or whether it's much more of a sort of community outreach thing as well. And maybe you can answer this, but I wonder if that tension, I suppose it must have come from people, members, but I also wonder if it was a tension that existed because arts funding didn't know where to place you if you were interdisciplinary, or if you were sort of doing community work as much as you were doing sort of developing experimental practice.
That didn't really occur then. What I seem to remember when I started was that I did the interviews, and there was on the interview panel, there was an amazing woman called Lynn Marie, who is the dance officer at Greater London Arts. There was an amazing Arts Council officer called Dick Matchett, who is a dance officer. And there was Tower Hamlets. And the basic agreement that happened at the point they offered me the job, which I didn't really quite get, but it happened around me in the group, was that the Arts Council and Greater London Arts would totally support me being appointed, but they knew I was young, so therefore Lynn and Dick would be right there beside me and helping me all along the way. And they were, and they still are. I'm still in touch with both of them, But that additionally, the Arts Council and Greater London Arts insisted that Tower Hamlets was woven in. And so I think that was probably, and because I wasn't around earlier, but if I think about it now, it was probably the absolute turning point for it becoming, maybe at the same time the community dance people started, it becoming very clearly a local venue to work with Tower Hamlets and not just about dance at that point. Although always holding on to dance as the key base, and still has, and that was the imperative, the body and movement, which was recognized, by key people in the collective, very clear part of this intercultural Tower Hamlets, because we still know it, everybody dances and sings, and that's the cultural base of joy in the world, really. So that's where for me, that's where the interest lay, was actually in the cultural understanding and knowledge sharing. And I still work a lot on gestural interfaces of different culture stuff in my telepresence work and stuff. So I'm still in this kind of translation mode of how do we really get to know each other, be non-judgmental, stop prejudices, and actually work out into a better world, which we really need at the moment, but through using dance, music, etc. So and how much there is of history and knowledge in the base of dance and sound and music, etc. So body sounds, voice and body stuff. So I think that was very key. And Lynn Marie is a very, very important mover and shaker during that period in the 80s. And she came from South Africa, and her dad had been an activist in the apartheid movement. She ring-fenced money at Greater London Arts for African and Asian dance in the mid-80s. She created a ring fence, a set amount of money. It was quite a large amount of money, which could only be spent on London-based African and Asian dance. And that caused chaos. You can imagine some people hated it. They were furious about it. And I was like, well, this is quite interesting. And I went with her on it because that's where we were going, and so did Chris and Mary. And actually, she changed the whole of the British dance scenario by that. That's why we've been ahead on that worldwide in actual, because a Jido started at that time. And then there was Pushkala, and there was all this stuff coming in. And then finally getting onto the stage at the place, because John Ashford came pretty much 2 or 3 times a month and picked everything for Spring Loaded. The first 3 or 4 Spring Loadeds literally came out of Chisenhale Cha-Cha-Cha nights. So, and a lot of dance umbrella stuff. So it was a feeder venue at that point for the bigger. You had to go on at Chisenhale before you would get on the stage at the place or into Dance Umbrella. That was very critical as well. That's very different now, of course.
That's great. No, thank you very much for sharing that.
Great, you're welcome.
Such a pleasure to hear you speaking about your time at Chisenhale.
Well, it was very special. It was a major influence, and I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time, to have that input from that incredible group of people who were, 10, 20 years older than me at that point, most of them. And that actually I just learned so much from, a lot of wisdom that was coming around that table. So yeah,
amazing.
it's great. Yeah.